I was emailed a question. We'd like to have the question read so we can get promptly to it. And it is?
What is the origin of the term slave, and how does it relate to the European nations?
Islam. Basically what you have is a misunderstanding that the term slave only deals with those who were in bondage from 1779 to 1865 during the times of slavery, the Asiatics, right? Unfortunately, this is a horrible misunderstanding because the root of the term slave has nothing to do with the Asiatic nations. In fact, what it deals with is the word Slav, which deals with ones of European descent, specifically Eastern European descent, like the country Yugoslavia, right? However, what I'd like to draw from, the book entitled The Slave Community by John Blassingame, okay? Chapter 2, known as entitled The Americanization of the Slave and the Africanization of the South. And going down, it says, from the 8th to the 19th century, hundreds of thousands of Europeans were enslaved by Arabs, Turks, and West Africans. European servitude to the Muslims began when the Arabs from North Africa launched their campaign to conquer the Iberian Peninsula in 711. After the expulsion of the Arabs from the Iberian Peninsula in the 15th century, Muslims frequently raided the coasts of Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, France, England, Ireland, and Iceland. And the islands of Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and Cyprus sacked their towns and carried their inhabitants back to North Africa, where they were enslaved because they were infidels. Using their language, it says, most of the white slaves were Spaniards and Portuguese and Italians captured by the centuries-long religious wars waged by the Muslims and the Christians in all the lands bordering the Mediterranean Sea. Thousands more Europeans and Americans shipwrecked on the North and West African coasts or captured by Arab privateers at sea were also enslaved. Estimates of the number of whites enslaved ranged between 500,000 and 1 million. But since Christians and Muslims representing many nations, frequently exchanged slaves, captured and recaptured each other's territory, and carried on a brisk business in ransoms, it is difficult to determine the total number of white slaves in Africa at any given time. The best figures we have are for Algiers, where during the 16th and the 17th century, there were between 25,000 and 40,000 white slaves. Whatever the number of whites enslaved, the primary reason historians are able to document their story was the Arab practice of ransoming Christian bondsmen. Fortunately for these scholars, those whites who recovered their freedom often wrote narratives, letters, and petitions, and gave interviews and depositions describing their enslavement. So as we can see, and it just goes on and on, I suggest anyone that's interested in further research on the topic obtain the book, but it goes on and on describing and delineating how your forefathers, the Moors, all right, and also the Asiatic nations who were indeed Muslims, frequently found themselves in positions at wars with Europeans, and when the Europeans lost, they were captured and sold off as slaves. That actually started before your forefathers were taken as bondsmen and women. All right. So the term slave did not originate with the Asiatic nations, and it is not limited to the Asiatic nations. And if we were to be honest and not disingenuous, we would admit that the term slave deals with the term Slav or Slavic, which relates to the European nations. And with that, I'll say peace.